The movie begins with a newlywed couple, Julia and Francis, who are moving to Romania. Francis, a Romanian, is transferred to his motherland by the company. A taxi drops them in front of the apartment where they have to live now. Julia, an American who knows nothing about Romanian, sees someone standing near the window on the second or third floor of the apartment. The apartment's owner shows them their apartment, and there is a big glass window in the room through which everything is clearly visible on the street. That night, when Julia cannot sleep, she gets to the window to see rain, and she sees a person staring at her from the window of the next apartment. But she ignores it, goes to her bed, and tries to sleep. The next day, Julia wakes up to the sound of a text message that her husband has sent her apologizing for going to work before she woke up. After that, she starts to set things and put clothes in cupboards, and while she is doing so, she hears the sound of dancing and cries from the adjacent apartment. She then plans to explore Romania while learning a new language that is not her native tongue. Several days later, she again notices someone from the next apartment staring at her, and she realizes this is the same person who has been keeping an eye on her since the first day. But she says nothing about this to her husband, and in the evening, when her husband returns home, they go outside to spend a beautiful time. While they are returning to their apartment, they see an ambulance and a man sitting bereft in it. Next, Julia comes across a news story on TV about a young girl found dead near their apartment and a silent killer wandering in the area. Hearing this dreadful news, Julia tells Francis about the person who stares at her from the window of another apartment, but he ignores her and tells her to prepare dinner early that evening as some of his colleagues are coming to his home. At supper time, one of Francis' colleagues named Simon talks about the murder of the girl near their apartment and how she was beheaded. He also talks about another girl who got murdered after her throat was slit, and he wants to inform them about a serial killer in their area whom the police named the Spider. In the next scene, when Julia is dumping trash outside, she meets with Irina, who lives in their neighbor's house. And she apologizes to Julia for the noise the other day. Later that day, Julia conducts an internet search about the serial killer and comes across a video clip in which a survivor of the killer's attack describes herself. She says she was followed by someone for several days. And then one day the killer entered her house and slit her throat. The killer sat there for hours, seeing the blood oozing from her throat. One day when she is walking on the road, she realizes someone is following her, and she runs from there. She decides to watch an English movie in the theater, and when she is sitting there watching the movie, she again feels the presence of someone beside her seat, although there are so many seats lying vacant in the theater. Fearing the person sitting behind her, she runs from the theater. In the next scene, she goes to a grocery store, where she finds the same person following her. Terrified by the unknown person, she enters the control room, from which she leaves for home. Julia informs her husband about the stalker, and the two go to the grocery store. Francis demands that the grocery store owner let him see the CCTV footage. While they are watching the CCTV footage, Julia takes a picture of that man, but Francis does not believe in her. Julia then spends the time idling in her apartment, not venturing outside for fear of that unknown person. That night, an elderly lady knocks on the door of her apartment, and she learns that her cat has gone missing. Irina invites Julia to her apartment, and when they are talking with each other in Irina's apartment, someone knocks on the door who turns out to be Irina's ex-boyfriend. Irina takes a pistol out of the drawer and shows it to her, which her ex-boyfriend had given her for protection. As she returns home, she decides to confront that person to find out who he is. She goes to the window and sees that person standing in the window of the next building, but this time she waves at him, and he waves back. She tells Francis about that person and tells him to call the police. The next day, the policeman comes, and like Francis, he too does not believe in Julia. However, to investigate the matter, the policeman and Francis go to the other building to see who is standing near the window. Francis returns and says the policeman found no crime against that person, and without having any evidence, the police cannot take action. The next day, she is walking on the street when she sees that person walking, and she decides to spy on him. He goes to an underground club, and Julia follows him. She learns that that person works as a cleaner in the club. Meanwhile, she sees Irina in the club, and she comes to know that she is a dancer at the club. Julia tells her about the whole matter, and she asks her about the cleaner, but Irina says she knows nothing about the cleaner as they are replaced frequently. Before Irina leaves, she assures Julia of her security. That night, Julia has a dream in which she sees that when she is about to go to bed, suddenly someone from behind attacks her and covers her face with a piece of cloth. After that, she hears loud voices from Irina's apartment, and she rushes for her help. She knocks at her door. Meantime, other neighbors, including the apartment's owner, also come. She requests that the owner unlock the door of Irina's apartment because her life is in danger. As they enter the apartment, they see nothing but a cat that belongs to the old lady. The old lady takes the cat and goes to her apartment. The owner of the apartment complained to Frances about the weird behavior of Julia, and she said she did not need such tenants, who created a dreadful environment. Frances tries to convince Julia not to do so, as it will affect her mental health. Julia then makes a phone call to Irina's club to learn more about her, but they know nothing about Irina's whereabouts. The next day, Julia hears someone knocking on the door of Irina's apartment, and it is her ex-boyfriend. Julia asks him about Irina's obscure disappearance. As she makes a phone call to Irina, she hears the phone ringing inside Irina's apartment. Julia convinces Irina's ex-boyfriend to go along with her to the next building to ask about Irina from the person who works as a cleaner in the club. They find the door locked, and Irina's ex-boyfriend leaves, saying he has something important to do. Julia then gathers her courage and knocks at the door alone, but to her disappointment, an old man opens the door. She apologizes to him and leaves the building. As she is walking downstairs, she sees the person who has been following her standing before her, and she panics while rushing towards the elevator. She escapes from him and runs away. The next day, the policeman brings the person Julia believes has been following her to her apartment. The cleaner has registered a complaint against Julia for disturbing him and his old father, but the policeman offers to mend the matter. The cleaner bizarrely shakes hands with Julia and leaves along with the policeman. That night, Frances breaks the news to Julia by saying the serial killer has been arrested, and he shows her the killer's photo. This is the same person who was sitting in the ambulance when Julia and Frances were returning home in the early days. Frances takes Julia to an office gathering, where she sees Simon talking about her in Romanian. She learns they are making fun of her, and she leaves the gathering rudely. When Julia is traveling home by train, she sees the cleaner sitting at a small distance. She gathers her courage and asks him why he stares at her all night. He then says he is fed up with his miserable life, in which he has to take care of his old, ailing father. That's why he has started to stare at people. He says he has been very happy since the day Julia waved at him and that he wants to befriend her. After that, she reaches home and packs her luggage to go away from Frances's life because she thinks she has made his life miserable. Meanwhile, she hears music from Irina's apartment, and when she goes there, she finds Irina's corpse laying fastened on a chair. Someone suddenly covers Julia's face from behind, and when the cover is removed, she discovers the cleaner holding a dagger. He tells Julia how he killed Irina and how he hid her corpse. Frances comes back, and he searches for Julia while the cleaner cuts her throat before she can shout for help. Julia's worst fears are realized. The cleaner is a serial killer. She then starts crawling towards the drawer where Irina has kept her pistol. But before she can get the pistol, her body gives up. The cleaner stares at Julia when she is breathing her last. When Frances makes a phone call to Julia, he hears the ringing of her phone coming from the adjacent apartment. On the other hand, the cleaner sees a small girl who has been seeing him kill Julia. Immediately, he hides all the evidence, and when he is leaving for the small girl to kill her, he confronts Frances. Suddenly, Julia takes Irina's gun and shoots the cleaner dead because she is still alive. And the movie ends here.